BGP. I'm so glad that you finally got back to me with your response to my video. I laughed the entire time. I also noticed a bunch of misinformation and more blatant lies that you stated in your video, so I'm going to address it in this video.
To make the claim that African Americans were the face of and initiated the civil rights movement is in fact literally erasing the blood, sweat, and tears of all other marginalized communities who were a part of the civil rights movement. First of all of these groups were fighting for civil rights prior to the civil rights movement, which started in 1954 and lasted until 1965. The civil rights movement was a collection of movements and lawsuits that happened during a specific time period across the entire nation. It included all marginalized groups who were fighting for their civil rights, which also included Native Americans, quote-unquote Latinos, or Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, etc., Asians, and women. It was not just one group. Now, unfortunately, what they tell you in the history books and in school is one group, African Americans. They minimize and erase all of the other major contributions by all of these other groups. And it's purposeful to cause division amongst the groups and to further erase Native Americans. Because whether people want to admit it or not, the vast majority of Mexicans are Native Americans. And erasing our history is part of indigenous erasure, Native erasure. And if they make it look like we don't struggle as hard, we didn't fight as hard, then it's given a perception that people fought for our rights for us, which is simply not true. Now, while she tries to say I try to tell her what anti-Blackness was, she also thought she could say what anti-Native was, which is quite funny because anti any marginalized group is all the same thing. It includes microaggressions, overt and overt racism, misconstruing and purposely revising of other groups' histories. Now, I clearly stated in the video that you posted how she misconstrued Obsidian's comments, purposefully pulled out only certain sentences to make it seem like she was being anti-Black, without reading the entire context of the comment, and while also erasing all of her comments, deleting them, so nobody can see what was being said in the comments. Now, if you or CJ couldn't figure that out, that's not a me problem. That's a you problem, and a problem of comprehension skills and context. I suggest go learning some more comprehension skills and stop misconstruing people's words.
Your insistence on trying to erase African Americans of their role in pioneering the civil rights movement is literally anti-Blackness. Do you not understand what pioneer means? Admitting that Black people pioneered the civil rights movement does in no way erase what other demographics did and the contributions they made after the fact. Seems like you refuse to give credit where credit is due. You know where that comes from, right? White supremacy.
And get this, she pointed to the Rainbow Coalition as evidence of broader involvement across communities, which is true, but without recognizing that Fred Hampton, a prominent member of the Black Panther Party, founded that coalition. It's not a conspiracy or misconception to state that African Americans were the face of the civil rights movement. It's a historical fact.
I nor CJ misconstrued Obsidian's or your words BGP. I've noticed that when Obsidian speaks of Black people, there is always a tone of contempt in her words. This is what she was doing in CJ's comments.
Again, misconstruing words. No one claimed it was a conspiracy. However, it is not a historical fact that African Americans were the face of the civil rights movement and erasing everybody else in that movement. Also, misconstruing my words when I stated that it was the Black Panthers, the Brown Berets, AIM, the Young Lords, and the Rainbow Coalition who all played a part and worked together after the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed. To further clarify, the Chicano movement started in 1965, Black Panthers started in 1966, Brown Berets started in 1967, AIM started in 1968, Young Lords started in 1969. The Rainbow Coalition started thereafter. Yes, which was led by Fred Hampton. She left out what I said about those other groups, didn't she?
She also claimed that African Americans and the civil rights movement did not influence immigration reform in the U.S.
Again, misconstruing words. She made the claim that African Americans had a direct impact on the 1965 Immigration Act. I stated that no, they did not. No group had a direct impact on the 1965 Immigration Act, as it was Congress who wrote that act. African Americans, Native Americans, Mexican Americans were not a part of writing that act. While it's true the civil rights movement influenced the 1965 Immigration Act, it was through the influence of all of these groups, not just one.
You're all over the place in your attempt to erase African Americans.
Gabriel Chin, who is an immigration law professor at the University of California, Davis, and the co-editor of a book called the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, stated otherwise. The Civil Rights Revolution was responsible for a relaxation of immigration laws. The Civil Rights Movement was intimately connected with immigration reform. Black Americans and their allies fought for the poor in other lands as well as the United States.
She then misconstrues Gabriel Chin's quote. He literally says African Americans and their allies, which would include all of those other groups.
This is confirmation that you don't understand what pioneering means. This is embarrassing for you.
Not just African Americans. And on top of that, he stated the civil rights movement influenced this because of all the racial reform that was happening. Again, as we've established, there were multiple groups that were a part of the civil rights movement. Matter of fact, if it wasn't for the Hernandez versus Texas case, the 1965 Civil Rights Act wouldn't be what it is today. And here's why. 1954, Hernandez versus Texas. The exclusion of otherwise eligible persons from jury service solely because of their ancestry or national origin is discrimination prohibited by the 14th Amendment. Chief Justice Earl Warren. On May 2nd, 1954, Chief Justice Earl Warren, the rest of the Supreme Court, unanimously ruled that the 14th Amendment protects those beyond the members of the quote-unquote two-class theory, and that Mexican Americans were, quote, a special class in Jackson County, Texas. Despite more than 100 years of citizenship rights under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 and post-World War II integration into the local economy, Mexican Americans in Texas endured segregation and systemic jury discrimination, which reached a climax in 1951 with the Hernandez case. Despite more than 100 years of citizenship rights under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 and post-World War II integration into the local economy, Mexican Americans in Texas endured segregation and systemic jury discrimination, which reached a climax in 1951 with the Hernandez case. The lawyers claimed that the all-Anglo-Saxon jury, which indicted Hernandez, denied him the equal protection under the 14th Amendment. The Texas Court of Appeals held that the 14th Amendment applied to a quote-unquote two-class theory, classifying Mexican Americans as a special class within the white race, while legal journal arguments pointed to inclusion of interclass discrimination under this clause. The lawyers convinced the Supreme Court to grant Hernandez another trial with a jury of his peers. They did eventually indict him and imprison him for murder. There also remains limited documentation on this case because records have been vanished or hidden. Again, this is purposeful erasure of Native people. And had it not been for this case, race would still only be considered black and white. And the 1965 Civil Rights Act would not have included color and national origin. It would have only had race. So that case expanded what race was and who could be considered a marginalized class based off of national origin or color. Since we all know, Mexicans are not considered a race. Again, proving how other groups of people contributed to the civil rights movement as a whole and the 1965 Civil Rights Act itself.
Consider the words of Hispanic civil rights leaders like Gus Garcia. Gus said, "I know the Negroes aren't getting their full share of democracy, but frankly, I'm prejudiced against Negroes, and I do not believe that they are entitled to everything we get."
Now, what's quite hilarious is I did a reverse image search on this particular quote and picture. And guess what I found? The only place it existed was on X, aka Twitter, from an ADOS account. Someone made this quote up and put it on a picture of Gus Garcia. He never actually said these things. Never. Not once. Couldn't find that quote anywhere. All over the internet. Looked. Couldn't find it.
It's interesting that you say this because a quick Google search would have shown that you can find tons of information about Gus Garcia, Hector Garcia, and John J. Herrera, which you falsely claim you couldn't find. Even the court case that you highlighted can be found online with those sentiments being highlighted and talked about here and here.
The rest of LULAC wanted to ally with African Americans, and he scrutinized the rest of LULAC for wanting to do that. He was one of the very few in the organization who did not want to ally. Now, of course, we know there's still anti-Blackness within certain individuals, just as there's anti-Native or anti-Mexican or anti-Latino rhetoric from the Black community. It happens. This just goes to show you that anybody can cherry pick anything to fit a narrative. And even though you did have and still do have Black leaders who vehemently oppose immigration, which is anti-Native, is not indicative of the entire community. So for you to take one quote and make it indicative of the entire community, and that's what the entire community wanted, is in itself anti-Native, anti-Mexican, anti-Hispanic, Latino, whatever you want to call it.
The way you lie so venomously. At no point did I say it was everyone, however it was a majority holding these views. That was my point of highlighting the individuals that I did.
Let's move on, shall we?
BGP, you have no clue what you're talking about. I know more about Latin America than you ever could.
Apparently you don't. We'll get more into that here a little bit later.
This is why your comments are completely hilarious to me. I don't know why y'all do this. You guys will be very vocal about your disdain for Black people, then when Black people play it back, you start trying to gaslight us.
So many of you need to learn what the word gaslighting means. It's a form of manipulation to get your victim to question their insanity or their reasoning.
Which is exactly what you're doing right now.
Who is y'all? Again, with the generalizations, and I personally have no disdain for Black people. I do have a disdain for pseudos who consistently push pseudo-history and pseudoscience to push a narrative that doesn't exist. Stop conflating the two.
You definitely hold animosity towards Black people. Again, many of you don't understand that it doesn't matter what's coming out of your mouth. Your actions will always reveal your true intent.
And again, with your cherry picking, because I call out white people and other natives when they push pseudoscience and pseudo-history. You like to hyper-focus on Black people. But let's move on.
Let's move on to your second point. You claim that I didn't call out the supposed pseudoscience of Jazzy, Gia, Tika, and the Syndicate. I don't think you understand what race, racism, and racial eugenics really are. I've noticed this from many of the live streams you hold and visit on TikTok. Race is a social construct, however there are varying differences from each race. Native Americans have differences in bone structure versus African Americans. This isn't scientific racism to point this out. This is the very thing that proves Native Americans were the first people of the Americas. Funny enough, I addressed this when Mateo was also spreading the same misinformation.
I see why you couldn't address the pseudoscience, because you are pseudo yourself. And I'll be addressing Jazz and Rhea and the rest of the syndicate in other videos with the videos I have recorded about them. But let's address your pseudoscience. Go ahead and look up this article. Forensic anthropologists have been questioning the long-standing practice of estimating ancestry or a person's geographic origin as a proxy for estimating race, where they urge, quote, "We urge all forensic anthropologists to abolish the practice of ancestry estimation." And a growing number of forensic anthropologists have grown critical of ancestry estimation and want to replace it with something more nuanced. The body of a skeleton can provide a person's age or height, but the question of ancestry is reserved for the skull, specifically features of face and skull bones known as morphoscopic traits that vary across different groups of humans and can occur more frequently in certain populations. One trait, called the post-traumatic depression, is a small indentation located on top of people's heads. For a long time, forensic anthropologists assumed that if the skull was indented, the person may be black. But forensic anthropologists know little else about the post-traumatic depression. There's not been any understanding as to why this trait exists, what causes it, and what it means. Moreover, the science linking the trait and African ancestry was flawed. In 2003, Joe Hefner, a forensic anthropologist at Michigan State University, used trait lists from a key textbook, Skeletal Attribution of Race, to examine more than 700 skulls for his master thesis. He found that the post-traumatic depression was present in only 40% of people with African ancestry and is actually more common in many other populations. So no, you cannot use one's skeletal remains or skull to determine one's race or ancestry. That is old, debunked pseudoscience. The way you can tell the difference is through certain mutations in DNA, and that's about it. So it seems like you really don't know more about race and ethnicity, because you're just as pseudo as everybody else. And the fact that you say that race is a social construct, which it is, and then you proceed to link it to biology, which you linked it to skulls and bones. We all know race is not biological.
Oh my gosh. BGP, please get out of your own way. I and the syndicate tried explaining this to Mateo when he was also spreading the same misinformation. All I can do is shake my head at your ignorance. Following your own logic, how can you identify a black person when you see one? How can you identify a Native American? You don't even understand that you've opened the door to pretendianism. Race is a social construct, yes. But it is tied to physical attributes, like bone structure. This is anti-indigenous / anti-Native American behavior right here.
Quite the contradiction you have there.
Point 3. Now I've never pushed back on Native American creation stories because I know that is the beliefs of Native American people and I think that's fine. The syndicate, however, were approaching from a scientific point of view, which is also fine, and no way does that cause Native erasure.
Again, mocking Native American creation stories, especially when none of you understand what those creation stories actually mean, is pushing anti-Native rhetoric. Imagine making fun of somebody else's culture and their creation stories because you don't believe them or you don't understand what they mean. You would then call that anti-Black, now wouldn't you, if this was towards the Black community or African people, right? Again, the hypocrisy. Furthermore, again, I will address the syndicate's pseudo bullshit because it is. They're not using science. They're misinterpreting the science because they don't understand it. Claiming Native Americans are descendants of Asians is pseudo. What isn't pseudo is talking about migration patterns. Because as I've stated before, none of these early humans were Asians, Native Americans, Africans, or Europeans. Nobody knows what cultures they were, what their phenotypes were, or what languages they spoke. So to claim them to be anything that we use modern day words for is intellectually disingenuous.
Not really, it's more disingenuous to try and play semantics with the wording. I find this point highly ironic considering that so many of you will claim you believe in science when it's something you want to use against Black people. The moment the science conflicts with your beliefs, you will refute it outright. It's very interesting to me. Let's move on.
Again, there you go, generalizing because you're supposed to be addressing me, and I correct the misuse of the science that so many of you push, which is indeed indigenous erasure and anti-indigenous. Again, the hypocrisy is crazy to me.
Points 4, 5, and 6 will be addressed together. You claim I was playing the Oppression Olympics with the whole Manny and Kit Kat situation when I called y'all out and allegedly minimized the WB word. This is an outright lie and you're trying to deflect. At no point did I ever minimize the WB word or its impact. I called you guys out on your hypocrisy in attempting to call out Kit Kat when you said nothing to Mano or Manny after both of them said the N-word multiple times. I literally have the receipts and how it all played out on this very channel and you're gaslighting in my comments. This is crazy. Y'all said nothing until I called you guys out. You guys had the audacity to come after Kit Kat when you guys were pretending like it never happened.
Again, who is y'all? because you only like to post what you want to post on your page. I've called out Mono several times. I've called out Manny several times. It's not my fault nobody wants to listen to me. On top of that, I told Kit Kat in the video that you posted that it's not okay to use racist rhetoric to fight racist rhetoric. I've said this to natives plenty of times throughout the last 2 years. They should not be anti-black because certain black people are being anti-native. What you should have done was called out both Kit Kat, Manny, Mono, and whomever else is being anti-native or anti-black, not just one person. On top of that, Mono and Manny had me blocked for a very long time, up until recently. And I have literally unfollowed a lot of people because they keep on bringing them into their spaces. Stop saying y'all when you're directly speaking to me. I don't care about the rest of the crap you say about anybody else. That has nothing to do with me, because you really don't have anything to say to me. You got to use everybody else to try to pin it on me as well. Matter of fact, I don't even allow the word wabo in my space. Never use the word. I don't like the word. And I've explained why that word is detrimental to Afro-Indigenous people, which is also on your page. So conveniently, you don't acknowledge that part, right? And again, using the term gaslighting wrong, and only want to call out what you think is appropriate to call out instead of calling all of the bullshit out. You're biased, and it's clear. Just admit it.
Y'all includes all the individuals that I address in my videos. There is no biased nature coming from me. Y'all usually make that claim once I make a video addressing you directly. I want to highlight a point from your first comment. You say that I literally call everything anti-blackness. This statement right here literally shows how you have no concept of U.S. history or world history. Every place that got colonized by Europeans has anti-blackness within it. This is why many places have racial slurs for black people. This is why marrying white is seen as a come-up in many cultures. Anti-blackness is in every culture. I can present examples from every continent. Imagine gaslighting black people about their lived experiences, but getting upset at the thought of this being done to you. I don't play oppression Olympics. I educate those of you who disrespect and dismiss the experiences and history of black people. Like you're currently doing right now, BGP.
Yes, anti-blackness is a global issue. But so is being anti-indigenous, because indigenous is a global term. Being anti-indigenous in the Americas, being anti-indigenous in Africa, being anti-indigenous in Asia, being anti-indigenous in Australia, New Zealand, this is all a global problem as well. But imagine you gaslighting indigenous people.
Once again, your logic is flawed here. If indigenous is a global term, then who are you talking about? Since you just said that term applied to everyone.
And their lived experiences. You are more concerned with natives being anti-black to pseudo-black people than you are about the pseudo-black people who are being anti-native and pushing indigenous erasure.
False. I address those who use the black pretendians as an excuse to make derogatory comments about black people as a whole. I've highlighted this multiple times. These comments are usually anti-black stereotypes that apply to the entire diaspora. I've posted videos of this multiple times. They've talked badly about African Americans, Africans, and Africa. I've got screenshots and video recordings of the transatlantic slave trade being made fun of. I've got screenshots of people telling others and black people that they aren't allowed to marry black people. I even posted a video highlighting how one of those white natives told another native woman that she ruined her kid's life by having them with a black man. Despite this, y'all want to fight me in my comments claiming that I'm biased and falsely claim everything is anti-black.
Again, your bias is showing. And you clearly don't understand what mestizaje is or blanqueamiento and how those came to be, which were a form of eugenics. I would encourage you to read the article, The Myth of Mestizaje. That way you have a better psychological understanding of how it occurred. Because clearly you don't know shit about Latin American history, as you claim you do.
This is a lot of projection on your part. You say that I have made claims that black people built the U.S. economy, while forgetting the contributions of Mexican and Native Americans. Firstly, at no point did I ever dismiss or claim that Mexican people or Northern Native Americans didn't have any contributions to the U.S. economy. However, one thing that I will not ignore is the historical context. The U.S. was supposed to be a white man's haven. Before 1965, they weren't truly allowing anyone of color to immigrate to the U.S.
See, slavery built the U.S. economy. So yes, African Americans were a part of that. So were Mexican and Native slaves. You can also go back to the building of the railroads, the rancheros, the mines in the Southwest that literally built the entire economy for the Southwest and West Coast. All people of color were responsible for building the U.S. economy because all people of color were enslaved. Only one slavery is spoken about. And of course, you're wrong that people of color were migrating to the U.S. before 1965. As there are several immigration reform acts before the 1965 Immigration Act that took place because of people of color immigrating. You can look back at the Chinese Exclusion Act or the Immigration Act of 1924, which shows that people have been fighting for immigration rights long before the Civil Rights Movement as well. I thought you knew history really well, though, huh? I guess you don't.
Yikes! It's clear that you don't understand what the 1924 Immigration Act was about. This once again shows how you speak out of the side of your neck before doing proper research on what it is that you're speaking about. The Immigration Act of 1924 was about restricting the flow of immigrants migrating to the country. You see this pattern reflected in the several immigration acts. 1882, 1888, 1891, 1899, 1924, and you get the point. You see the same pattern until 1965, where you start to see the U.S. government rolling back those problematic restrictions that they had on many regions worldwide. You're doing all of these mental gymnastics because you refuse to admit that black people pioneered the Civil Rights Act. Now let's address this last point. You claim that race isn't hierarchical. Good Lord. Have you learned nothing from anything I've ever taught? You say there are laws that affect brown people that won't affect black people the same way and vice versa. What laws are these? Are you referring to immigration laws? You do realize that black people immigrate to the U.S. as well, right? You do realize that black people also get deported at a high rate also, no? You have no clue what you are talking about.
Actually, it's you who doesn't know what they're talking about, as the racial caste system in the United States is a binary caste system, black and white. Yes, black and white immigrants do get deported. But let's talk about Texas, where they can pull somebody over that they suspect is not legal. Now, who do you think they're going to pull over? A black person or a person who looks like a stereotypical Mexican? And because race is systemic, it's literally used against all people of color, not just one group of people.
Huh? That makes no sense. This is cognitive dissonance. You contradicted yourself in the same breath.
Why do you think the southern border gets demonized so much? Why do you think as soon as those Mayan people from Guatemala cross over are now considered Latino or Hispanic and are no longer considered Maya? And we can also look to statistics where Native Americans are disproportionately killed at higher rates than any other ethnic group in the United States, the highest suicide rates, the highest unemployment rates. Those are stats that nobody looks into or wants to talk about because it doesn't fit the narrative of binary race in the United States and pushes Native erasure, which again, you fall for every single time. And race in the Latin American diaspora and the racial caste system is different from that of the United States.
This is false. I've already covered this in a previous video. In the annals of history, the caste system stands as a testament to the oppression and division wrought upon the native and African populations of Latin America, organized in a rigid, racially determined order. Latin American societies relegated individuals to predetermined castes, dictating their opportunities and social standing. At the zenith stood the exclusive domain of the white elite, their privilege unchallenged and untouchable. Below, the mestizos, born of European and indigenous heritage, and the mulattoes, born of European and African lineage, occupied an ambiguous space, neither fully accepted nor wholly rejected. Yet, at the nadir of this hierarchy lay the indigenous and black populations, burdened by the weight of centuries of subjugation and discrimination. To the white elite, this hierarchy wasn't merely a system of control, it was a validation of their perceived superiority in intellect and beauty, a justification for their dominion over others. This was the same caste system carried out by two different countries on opposite sides of a made-up border.
Something you should know, right?
You also state that I conflate colorism with racism. Colorism is literally a branch off of the tree of racism. You're once again displaying your ignorance on the subject. You cannot have colorism without racism. This is why y'all make a beeline for white people while telling your children not to bring home a black person. Like, are you serious? This is ultimately why black people are considered the lowest of the low socially and economically. You can't even argue with me on this because you guys still don't understand that no matter what comes out of your mouth, your subconscious will let me know what is going on in that head of yours.
And yes, while colorism is a branch of racism, they are still two separate systems, and colorism mostly affects within a community, and while it does bleed out into regular society, they are still two different systems. Racism affects every person of color. Colorism affects a hierarchy from dark to light. And because race is binary in the United States, colorism affects within the community, more so than it will ever affect outside of the community.
I don't think you even understand half of what you say. How can colorism be a byproduct of racism, but not be linked to it? You might need to rethink that statement because it doesn't make sense. Racism and colorism are not two different systems. They are the same system with the same goal, white supremacy. This is why I keep reiterating to white people that they cannot experience colorism because colorism was a byproduct of racism. The idea that dark-skinned people do not align with the European standard of beauty, i.e. whiteness, is why so many around the world have a preference for lighter-skinned people. So you see, these two things are linked.
And again, there you go, playing Oppression Olympics. Because while black people are at the bottom of the food chain, so to speak, when it comes to certain things, there are other marginalized communities of color who are also at the bottom of the food chain in other areas, as I stated previously. And you're more than welcome to look up these stats because they are there. It's really not that hard to find.
You say I invalidate natives from Latin America. Who is this? Mano, Manny, or Mateo? I'll stand 10 toes down on each one of those individuals. None of them are Mexican and none of them are connected to tribes. You say this isn't my place. Again, you are wrong. Out of all of them, I'm the only person with a true connection to Mexico and Latin America, seeing as my father is actually Mexican and immigrated to the U.S.
Not you tokenizing your Mexican father. Because all you ever talk about is how black you are and about black people. But now all of a sudden you're so connected, right? And again, Mexican is not only just a nationality, it is also an ethnicity. And while I can't stand Manny, Mono, or Mateo, and while I call out their obvious anti-black and anti-native behavior, that doesn't mean that they're not Mexican or they're not native.
Firstly, I am not tokenizing my parent. I'm stating a literal fact. I actually haven't talked about myself being black, other than a handful of passing comments I've made. This is what let you guys know that I was black. I'm mentioning my Mexican father now to prove a point. No, Mateo is not Mexican, neither is Mano or Manny. In fact, Manny stopped claiming it altogether after getting dragged repeatedly for falsely claiming Mexican. Mexican people are born in Mexico. African people are born in Africa. Being a descendant is not the same thing. This is a problem that you all have. Claiming things that are inauthentic to you. Now I get what you're doing by trying to claim Native American instead of identifying as a Latina. You're trying to take a stand against the patriarchy. I get it. However, you, Manny, Mano, and Mateo did not grow up connected to any tribe.
Just like the black pseudos that everybody calls out, it doesn't mean that they're not black or they're not African, just because they hold anti-blackness and anti-native sentiments. This weird colonial mindset of telling people who they are is crazy to me. Even I have told the pseudos, if you have the ancestry, go connect back to your people. And they don't want to because they know they're lying.
No, you haven't, but I love how you attempted to turn that around.
So try again.
It's crazy, because you don't see the issues with them saying fucked up shit and hiding behind a Native American title or a Mexican title. It's extremely problematic, and you certainly shouldn't be defending this. And no, African Americans are not African. They are African descendants. This is what African American means.
Oh, I definitely don't defend their bullshit because I've called them out on their bullshit before. Manny cosplays. Mono doesn't know who the fuck he is. He just knows that his family comes from Mexico. And Mateo is still trying to figure himself out as well. And even with African Americans, they are still African people. And this colonial mindset of saying you're just a descendant is crazy, especially because colonialism detribalized all of the African Americans that were brought over here on slave ships, just like they detribalized so many Native Americans. Why so many of us aren't connected to our tribes.
The detribalized nonsense must stop. By your own logic, everyone else with ancestry can make these claims, including a lot of the black pretendians on TikTok. Some of them have a little bit of native ancestry too. However, that doesn't stop many of you from calling any of them pretendians, which in my opinion, they are. None of them are connected to tribes either, so they are pretendians. But if we're applying that to them, then we are applying it across the board. Welcome to equality.
So maybe since people aren't African, then go and tell all the Pan-Africans from the syndicate that they're not African because they say they're African all the time. Are you correcting them and telling them that they're just descendants or no? You want to preach about white supremacy and anti-blackness while you're sitting up here upholding white supremacy and anti-blackness. You're literally upholding colonial mindsets because colonial people, colonizers, try to tell us who we are all the time. So what makes you think you should tell anybody else who they are? Y'all are weird for that shit.
I think a better course of action for you is to simply support Native Americans instead of trying to co-opt the identity for yourself. You're stepping on toes. You don't get to merely make certain claims because you've romanticized the idea in your head. When did I call you a white girl?
You said it in this video you made.
Let's set the record straight here. Are there brown indigenous people? Absolutely. However, there are those of you who are not brown at all. In fact, you're actually white. I'm getting real tired of you problematic ones who are actually white trying to claim indigenous/Native American when it's convenient for you. Since I didn't call you out by name, I'm going to take that as you thinking it applied to you, and I'm certainly not going to fight you on it. I guess you're white adjacent then.